Thank you. So wait, don't go anywhere. I'm going to have you come sit up here for questions. You're still on the spot. So I think there's little buttons right here for microphones. If I can have Councilmember Spriggs and Dr. Becker come up as well. So I had a couple of questions in mind, and I think my speakers have hit a lot of them really, really well. I know we had a number of questions in general just asking about what are some of the adaptation strategies that are in the portfolio of strategies. And I know you guys mentioned a few of those, but I thought maybe you could elaborate a little bit in some of, not necessarily what you've decided, if I know a lot of you are still in those discussions, but maybe just what are some of the options, and it varies very much for community or city and agency, but you could talk a little bit about what some of those strategies are that you're looking at. You want to start?
Well, I think it becomes apparent in most beach communities, just as Del Mar arrived at the conclusion that preserving their beaches was the highest priority. I can't speak for Imperial Beach having gone through a beaches versus commercial and residential. We did not. We expect probably to do both. It's very clear that with a title like Imperial Beach and with the iconic activities that happen on our beachfront and with all of so much of our commercial investment geared towards the beach, we've got to have a beach. And it's almost a no-brainer. So I can go on a bit of a limb and say that of the adaptation strategies, that is beach sand replenishment and preserving the beach is going to be big, while protecting the infrastructure, the private and public infrastructure. There's another reason. It buys time. We need to buy time. We need to buy time until the state and the nation understand that this is that the coastal areas are an important, vital part of our national and state heritage, and that the resources become available to address these adaptation strategies. It's going to take big resources, and this is why I think California is going to need to be a leader, and our state is going to need to figure out how we protect our national treasure beaches from the north to the south of the state of California. And while we're figuring that out, we've got to buy time. And so I think preserving the beaches while we get a public consensus and an economic consensus, et cetera, about what to do next is probably going to be, by default, what we'll end up doing.
I think a lot of what you said would probably be relatable in Del Mar as well. All I would add is that given the judgment that we made as a committee that we wanted to value access to the beach and beach width over other priorities, that made us lean away, although we didn't want to take any sort of adaptation measures off the table entirely. It made us lean away from coastal armoring as much as we could in every instance that we could. Because although that's very appealing as an urgent and a well-understood technique to protect property, it does accelerate beach loss and bluff erosion. And these were things we really didn't want to see. So although we don't, and I think when I was up front, I explained that we didn't really feel like we were done with this adaptation discussion when our committee ran out of time. And so I'm very glad that we're meeting again to continue to look at these things. But given the complexity of Del Mar, and also given the fact that the three different zones have a relationship to one another, although they all have different challenges, it's important to, I think, continue to collect data and look at the rate of sea level rise and pick the best methods that don't accelerate loss of beach. So I know that that doesn't paint a very clear picture, but I guess from my perspective, and I think others on the committee, we don't have a sense of having all the answers to this question yet.
And then from the utility perspective, we talked about adaptation measures, and I think where most of the thinking and direction is now is how do we make things survive if they do get inundated by salt water and make sure that it doesn't destroy the equipment. The other thing on larger projects that are being built, like South Bay Substation, there's an example where they went in, meaning they being the company, did 3 independent sea level rise studies and projected out to 2100, and then took the worst case scenario and then raised the grade of the facility to that. So that's how they've done it in the past. But I think it's trying to be more standardized, and that is being done under a California Public Utility Commission effort, and we've saw the 4th climate assessment. We're really looking for a statewide guidance on that, because we certainly don't want to go in and start doing work and then have the regulatory body come in and say, well, we don't totally agree with that. So we'd rather have it be statewide so that we're all on the same page going into it.
And I'll just add a little bit more detail to Del Mar's picture as I think about it. The fact that we do have wetlands to the north and south of Del Mar, one of our interests, I think, on the committee and priorities was to maximize the health and the resilience of those areas, because they can really help offset sea level rise on the other parts of town. So that's kind of a resource on that list of natural adaptation measures. And you and I are on that committee up in San Francisco with the Nature Conservancy on the 4th climate assessment, looking at collecting more data and sharing that information about natural adaptation alternatives to sea level rise protection. And I'm going to be very interested to see what the results of that committee are, so that we can hopefully integrate more of those into Del Mar's long-term planning and short-term planning too.
I just have to say, thank you for reminding me about the wetlands issue. We have a very cherished resource in Imperial Beach called the Tijuana River Estuary, and it is threatened by sea level rise as well. And there's a separate study and modeling process taking place with respect to those scenarios for the estuary that have to be factored into an overall strategy. The buffer between the ocean and the estuary is a potential area that is unoccupied, that could, where there could be planned retreat, but we don't know enough yet about what the effects of that strategy would be, I don't believe, on the habitat of the estuary to really say, well, this is the way to go. And there are a lot of different agencies involved and a lot of complex ecosystem questions involved, and that just adds to the need for good science and for patience and careful review of all these options and impacts.
Really great points. I think estuaries and wetlands are very complex. We know, there's a question of how they would even respond, naturally without any human interference. But since we are Southern California, most of our ecosystems are under what I would term a very managed state. So, even the management decisions that we are making today, I know our natural resource managers are starting to think about whether those are the right strategies in terms of adaptation going forward, whether that's restoration projects or preserving certain types of habitat and species. So let me open it up to questions. And before I have too many people scooting out, Danny, we're going to start passing out some post-workshop evaluation forms. If you can just take a few minutes to give us some of your comments, these are extremely valuable for us in terms of setting these workshops up and really understanding how you've benefited from them, or strengths and weaknesses. So I really appreciate you taking your time to help us with that. And let me go ahead and open up questions. I know Terry had a question first. Yes.
I'll I'll pose my comment as a question. There's a really interesting opportunity here, and Laura, what you're already doing is going to push this further, and that's for cities to work together and communicate. What you've learned and your priorities and your concerns in Imperial Beach, in some ways, are very different from Del Mar, but Del Mar encompasses just about everything that you're encountering. What Bruce didn't mention, so I'll add it here, is the Del Mar Fairgrounds. The Del Mar Fairgrounds are highly vulnerable to sea level rise, and it's quite interesting to go into the Cosmos model and look. With even the slightest amount of sea level rise, there's a lot of vulnerability. So the introduction of dunes and something that will, methods and strategies that will protect the fairgrounds are going to have to go in place and will. So that might be something that you'll be able to look at and use as an example, because to protect your coastal areas that are high revenue is going to require quite a bit of sand brought in, new armoring, and there's a strong argument that it should be done because of the size of the population and the value of those properties. In Del Mar, part of the reason we took the position of preserve the beach, preserve the bluffs first is because there have been some holes in the Planning Commission's documents for Del Mar, and there have been decisions that have been made, like in your case, building a new hotel.
Thinking about it, they're in the beginning stages of it. We've been talking with them through a big process that a bunch of people in this room are involved in, with FEMA, NOAA, Sea Grant, USGS, Coastal Conservancy, Coastal Commission. I hope I didn't leave anybody out. Looking at all these different, the state agencies and the federal agencies, the guidance that are coming out, the information that's coming out, and we're trying to work to align all of that, or not align it, but at least develop products that help you guys understand where they align and don't align. So this is an active area of trying to coordinate all these different entities, and State Lands does have some stuff that they're working towards it. So you can find their strategic plan on their website, and then it's like AB something. And I can get that to Laura to distribute to the group. But that's specifically for lessees on State Lands. Sure.
I'm going to go to the way back.
see if I can don't need this either. So my question is specifically for Mr. Spriggs. Hi, I'm Lisa Schiavanato. I work for California Sea Grant, and I'm actually new to the state, and so I'm very interested in all of the discussion that's happened today. But for Mr. Spriggs, my specific question for you, my ears really perked up because in my previous life, I worked a lot with towns on climate adaptation planning, and I wanted to know if you had any lessons learned on how to distill complicated scientific, legal, or economic information into products that are digestible to the public. So, length, format, things like that. I mean, that's really where the rubber meets the road if you really want robust public participation. And so I wanted to know if you could share with us what lessons learned or what worked really well for Imperial Beach.
Oh, I think you have a little mic there, too. You can push the little... There's a little button at the bottom. There you go.
All right, great. I think I touched on some of the answers to that. I think first and foremost, and this is a general lesson that we've learned in the last 2 weeks, you have to start with where folks are. What is, and it's not us and them. It's like where is my constituency? How do people sense this issue, and how much preliminary understanding has taken place? So there always will be newcomers in any workshop. Inevitably, any of us in public life know that someone's going to show up and say, well, I didn't hear about this or that or the other, or this is all news to me, and whatever. So you always have to take a step back before you can take a step forward, and remind people of what has been discussed and what the underlying concerns are, and to do it in terms that are familiar, like showing the flooding that has already been taking place and will likely take place more frequently. People can get that who live in coastal communities that have experienced it. And the newcomers to our community, it'll be a woman showed up at our city council meeting last night and said, she likes the views and doesn't want the new hotel to be built there. But that's a private transaction between private parties, and it's got the support of the city, and it's very important for our future financial sustainability. But she didn't know any of that. She had just moved into the community and spoke before the city council. Similarly, somebody could say, I don't understand this sea level rise stuff. Why are we worried about it? I haven't noticed any difference. So you got to kind of go back and always start off with where folks are before you can move forward as best you can. So that's the number one rule for me.
And I might weigh in on that a little bit, too. We did a community outreach with the city of Del Mar. We got a really nice location arranged. It was about 5 months into our process. We went to the powerhouse in Del Mar and made sure that everybody in the community was aware of this meeting for community outreach, for information about sea level rise and what you need to be worried about. And we decided that we would not lecture them. We had a couple of speakers. We gave them 5 minutes each. One of them was a professor emeritus, and his 5 minutes didn't really turn out that way. We felt kind of lucky that it only turned into about 15. But at least in terms of planning, I think it works well to think about not talking a lot of people, not throwing them a lot of terminology, really being careful to define things. Basic understanding that sea level rise is a vertical measurement and the horizontal is what's going to impact you, and translating that for them. And then we broke it up after just a little bit of time sitting down. We had tables set up around the room that had lots of poster boards with pictures on them so that people could actually see visual representations of what flooding might look like. And we had experts staffed at each of those tables so people could come up and ask questions. So it was more of an interactive evening and it was a really kind of a basic science brought home to Del Mar sort of an evening. And it was really well received. And we found a lot of concern in the community, and I think it helped to stimulate their involvement with our work. Terry, do you want to add anything to that in terms of our outreach?
What was really important and inspiring to the members on the committee were the people from the community who came. Some people came to every meeting, some people came to some of the meetings, and at every one of the committee meetings, I made sure that we ran around the room and asked people what's their name and why are they there. So talking about sea level rise became a real community building process. And what was important in all of that was building awareness, not just of what are we going to do about it, but what are the risks, what are the vulnerabilities, and why is this happening? Because as Bruce pointed out so well, climate change mitigation is the way to try to cure the disease as opposed to treating the symptoms, which is what we're doing here.
I would just like to add something as well. I think it has to not be scary. It has to not be intimidating. It has to not turn people to their preference, which is to either ignore it or to claim it ain't going to happen, a disbelief, to look for evidence, even if it's not scientific based, that this ain't right, this ain't the way it's going. So I really think this is an exercise in our, as people who may have more access to more information or may have done more thinking about it, to really hold hands with the folks who haven't, and not in a top-down way, not in a condescending way, not in a we-you way, and not in a hopeless way. Exactly. This is not easy. I mean, most of us are pretty well educated in this room, and people sense that when they interact with people who have more education than they do. And there can be a resentment there. And we need to actually figure out, this is a question of human communication. There's lots of elements here, but communication and getting to the point of shared understanding, even if it's not at the 2-meter level, even if it's just at the more frequent flood level, whatever that level is, where the shared understanding can begin to happen and you can build on, that's the value system I think that we need to employ in working on these issues. It doesn't mean that when we're in our specialized workshops and research areas and that sort of thing that we don't go for the gold. But then when we have to think about how are we communicating this, how are we interacting with the people who are going to make a difference, who are going to vote on these measures. Bond measures eventually are going to be needed. And we've got to be able to bring people along from a fundamental level on up. And that's just as much our task as people who are committed to working on these issues as the science and the advanced thinking.
So I will just add real quick, I worked with Ed on the IB project, and I would just say, we had planned for we had 2 public workshops and then a city council presentation as well. And I would say to any of you who are planning a process of this nature, as many workshops as you can. I mean, basically our conclusion at the end was that people didn't have enough time to absorb the adaptation options. This is a lot for people to take in. No matter how good you are at communicating, this is really something that has to be repetitious. And as Ed so eloquently put, you really have to bring it to them, to their neighborhood. We did an extensive stakeholder outreach, and really at the end of the day, we said, well, we need more. We need more engagement, because really folks they don't quite understand what it means for them and for their home and for their community, and you have to give them time to digest that. So I just wanted to add that real quick. I think we have time for one more question. Did you want to take? Do you want to? Yes. So the question is, have any of the workshops included fire department or lifeguard services?
In the case of Imperial Beach, absolutely, yes. In our that workshop that I showed on the screen with all the folks present, we actually had tables where our public safety people presented what to do in the case of flooding, how to prevent it, where sandbags are available, all sorts of those kinds of things. Our public safety community is very much involved in all of this forward thinking.
And for Del Mar, ditto. We involved them both with our community outreach and also had them attend. They were in attendance at a lot of our meetings. So, and in Del Mar, Public Works is part of Lifeguard. They're all sort of connected. Right.
I will. One of our first steps in IB was meeting with the lifeguards. Floods, right? So, well, we're running out of time, so I'm going to wrap it up. I want to say thank you to our panelists. Fantastic. I also want to say thank you to all of our partners to make this day possible, particularly our funders, the Coastal Conservancy, NOAA, and the Natural Resources Agency. Am I missing any funders? Or the logos are at the bottom of the agenda, if I forgot anyone. So in terms of post-workshop evals, if you could just hand them on your way out. And then also we have we have the Cosmos results for San Diego Bay, Del Mar, and IB on the posters here if you guys want to come check them out. And I think that is, and any resources we talked about today, we will be sending out follow-up emails and putting them online. So you all will have access to that. All right. Thank you, everybody.